Hello, everybody. In Module 4, I discussed communication games between managers and the markets. Module 4 has 6 lessons. Today, we're focusing on Lesson 1. I'm going to provide an introduction and discuss the classical unraveling result. This module, we focus on managerial disclosure, which assumes that the manager is the informed party. The manager provides information to the market who does not have information. This is different from Module 2, when we talk about feedback effects, when the market has information and the manager wants to learn from the markets. Whether and how manager provides information to the markets is the focus of this module. We have an implicit pre-assumption that manager and the market have different objective functions. Otherwise, if they have the same objective function, the manager would always disclose whatever the manager knows, and there is no interesting disclosure issue to study. For lessons 2 to 5, the focus would be on exposed disclosure, which means that the manager chooses what to disclose after observing the realization of some value-relevant information. Lesson 6, our focus would be on exante disclosure, which means the manager chooses a disclosure that specifies how to disclose before the realization of information signals. For the exposed disclosure, we're going to focus on 3 types of models. The difference lies in the assumptions on the truthfulness of managerial disclosure. The first type is verifiable disclosure. It states that if the manager discloses, the disclosure has to be truthful, but the manager can be strategically silent. Another name for this type of models is persuasion game. The second type of models are cheap talk models. In those models, the manager can disclose anything. The manager does not need to disclose truthfully, and lying incurs 0 cost, hence talk is cheap. The third type of model lies between the first and the second. It's the costly misreporting models. In those models, the manager does not need to disclose the truth. However, if the manager chooses to disclose differently from what the manager observes, the cost is not 0. The manager is going to incur some costs. Lessons 2 and 3 would focus on verifiable disclosure. Lesson 4 focuses on cheap talk. And lesson 5 would focus on costly misreporting. Let's first take a look at the verifiable disclosure. Akerlof famously shows that when there is information asymmetry between the manager and the markets, and no disclosure is allowed, the market would break down. We also discussed a complete credit market collapse due to adverse selection in lesson 6 of module 3. The intuition is similar. If the uninformed party is afraid that the informed party is going to take advantage of them using the information, they will be unwilling to trade with the informed party, and so the market is going to break down. Verifiable disclosure, on the other hand, as we're going to see, completely resolves this issue if the following assumptions are satisfied. The first is the manager always has information, and the market knows about it. The second assumption is that disclosure incurs no cost. This result is independently established by Grossman 9081 and Milgram 9081. The discussion would be based on Grossman 9081. Here's an illustrative example. Suppose manager wants to sell the firm to the markets to maximize the selling price. The firm's value is assumed to be uniformly distributed between 0 and 1. Suppose first, there is no disclosure. And the knee-jerk reaction to the market is that since there is no disclosure, let's set the price to be the average value of V, let's say 1/2. In this case, what do firms with values between 1/2 and 1 would do? They would disclose their value because disclosure is verifiable, it's going to be truthful, the market is going to believe whatever they disclose, and disclosure generates a higher price than not disclosing. Knowing about this, the market is going to revise its belief. The market is going to price non-disclosure as firms with values distributed between 0 and 1/2. So the non-disclosure price now will be 1/4. Then, what do firms with value between 1/4 and 1/2 do? They're going to disclose their value. The market is going to further revise its belief. Now, the price upon non-disclosure would be firms with value uniformly distributed between 0 and 1/4. So the price upon non-disclosure would be 1/8. That means firms with value between 1/8 and 1/4 will have incentives to disclose. The logic would go on and on until eventually all firms are going to disclose. In this case, we have full disclosure. And disclosure completely resolves the information asymmetry between the manager and the markets. Now, let's give some more formal treatments to prove the result. Again, the manager wants to sell the firm to the market to maximize the selling price. The firm's value V has some distribution between 0 and 1. If the manager discloses, because disclosure is truthful, the selling price is V. If the manager does not disclose, the selling price would be PND. ND stands for non-disclosure. Because there is no disclosure, PND will be independent of the value of V of the firms who choose not to disclose. That means all managers with value above the price of non-disclosure would have incentive to disclose. That means non-disclosure can only consist of firms with value below some threshold. Let's denote that threshold as V star, which means that the price upon non-disclosure is expected value of V, conditional on V, is below V star. And this also implies that managers with value of V star must be indifferent between disclosing and non-disclosing. Here's the logic. Suppose the manager observes V star strictly prefers disclosing over non-disclosing. Then V star must be strictly bigger than the non-disclosure price, which is expected V, conditional on V is smaller than V star. But that means managers observing firm value slightly below V star, observing value between PND and V star, they would prefer disclosing as well. But that violates the definition of non-disclosure, which means that non-disclosure means firm value must be below V star. So that means V star must be equal to expected V. Conditional on V is smaller or equal than V star. And because expectation of V, conditional on V is smaller or equal than V star, is usually smaller than V star, unless V star is the lowest point in the distribution. So this can only be satisfied if V star is equal to 0. So price upon non-disclosure is equal to 0. That means all firms with values above 0, which essentially means all firms are going to disclose. So we have full disclosure. What is the general intuition? The general intuition is that the market is going to assume the worst for any non-disclosure. Any non-disclosure market is going to assume that your value is the lowest, which means the most pessimistic belief. The most pessimistic belief results in all firms other than the worst information disclosing their private information, therefore full disclosure. While firms with the worst information, they're indifferent between disclosing and not disclosing. But then the market can infer from silence that those firms, they must have the worst information, consistent with the most pessimistic belief. The most pessimistic belief comes from the markets giving no benefit of doubt or silence, because the market knows that the manager always has information and disclosure incurs no cost. So silence can only mean the worst information. When a manager may not have information or when disclosure is costly, the market will give managers some benefit of doubt upon non-disclosure. And we're going to see full disclosure may not be optimal. This will be the topic of next class. To conclude, different types of managerial disclosure models, they make different assumptions. Whether or not managers can lie, and how costly if the managers can lie. When the market knows that the manager has information, the manager has to disclose the information truthfully, and there is no disclosure cost, and we will have full disclosure. So in this case, information asymmetry due to managers' private information does not cause any problem. In the next lesson, we're going to relax those assumptions and see how the unraveling result unravels. If you want to test your understanding of this lesson, check the link on the slides for the review quiz. Thank you very much.